As the night settles around you and the quiet of the world grows softer, imagine yourself sinking gently into a place where history and myth blend together like drifting clouds. The modern world, with all its noise and rushing thoughts, begins to fall away behind you. In its place, an older world slowly emerges, one carved not from the rigid lines of textbooks, but from the warm, timeless glow of stories told beside ancient fires. Tonight, you are invited to wander backward through the ages, into the dimly lit corridors of humanity's earliest memories, where mysteries linger unbroken and unanswered. This story is one of those mysteries, a tale whispered across millennia, reshaped by countless tongues, and carried gently to your ears. Allow your mind to loosen its grip on the present. Feel yourself floating on a calm current of time, drifting past familiar history, past recorded kings and empires, past the rise and fall of cities. Drift further still, into an era where the boundary between fact and myth was not sharp, but soft and shifting like desert sands. It is here, in this twilight realm of memory, that the story of an ancient tower begins, a tower whose origins are wrapped in silence, debate, and wonder. But before we explore its stones, its height, or its meaning, we must first understand the world that existed before it, a world unlike any we know today. Picture an earth still fresh, carrying the scent of renewal. In the fading echoes of a great flood, an event preserved in many ancient traditions, the land is quiet, washed clean. The sky stretches wide and unbroken, and the horizon carries no trace of modern borders or nations. People, few in number and bound tightly together, share not only the land but also their hopes, fears, and stories. They speak a single language, one that flows easily from mouth to ear, unmarked by dialect or accent. There is a softness in this imagined world, a simplicity born not from ease, but from unity. You walk slowly through this early landscape in your mind. The ground beneath your feet is dark and rich, shaped by the receding waters that once covered everything. Small settlements dot the open plains, nothing like the mighty kingdoms that would one day rise from these very soils. These early people gather around shared fires, working together, moving together, dreaming together. Their voices blend naturally, without the friction or misunderstandings that would later divide generations. Among them is a sense of purpose, vague but growing, like the first spark of dawn. In this shared world, stories travel quickly. A vision can spread through the people like a gentle breeze, carrying with it a subtle inspiration, perhaps the idea of building something lasting, something that would outlive the fragile human form. Their language allows them to cooperate effortlessly. There is no confusion, no clash of meanings, no need for translation. Their voices rise in harmony, forming plans as fluidly as water weaving through a stream. It is in this unity that the seeds of ambition quietly take root. As the night deepens around you, imagine the hum of their daily rhythms, the soft thud of hands shaping clay, the rustle of grass underfoot, the murmur of plans shared beneath the open sky. These early humans look toward the horizon and feel a pull, an urge to build not just homes or shelters, but something greater, something symbolic. At this early stage of humanity's story, people do not yet think of themselves as divided tribes or competing cultures. They are simply one people, sharing one language, imagining one future. Let yourself picture these early gatherings with a peaceful, cinematic softness. Individuals leaning in close, drawing patterns in the dust to illustrate grand ideas. Parents carrying children on their backs as they move across wide plains in search of fertile land. Groups pausing during their travels to look up at the vastness of the sky, wondering what mysteries rest beyond its pale blue curtain. The world is still enormous to them, still empty in many places, still full of possibility. You may imagine the quiet after sunset, when the plains cool and the people lie beside simple fires. Flames flicker gently across their faces as they talk in low, hushed tones, not wanting to disturb the tender peace of night. Their language is smooth and melodic, shared perfectly among them. Every word is understood, every idea can be shaped instantly into action. Such unity is rare in any era, but here it feels natural, effortless, like wind moving through tall grass. This early world offers a sense of calmness that settles around you like a warm blanket. There is no rush, no urgency, no towering cities or bustling streets. Only open skies, open land, and open hearts. It is from this serene beginning that the great mystery of the Tower of Babel will slowly rise, born not out of chaos, but from a moment of human togetherness. Before the division of tongues, before the scattering of nations, there was harmony. A single voice carried by countless people. Take a slow breath and imagine how it must have felt to be part of such a world. A place where every person you met could understand your thoughts without hesitation. A place where collective effort flowed smoothly, where intentions were clear, and where cooperation was the foundation of survival. There is a gentle beauty in such unity, a tranquil rhythm that soothes the mind as it drifts deeper into the story. As you rest within this vision of ancient humanity, the stage is set. The early world stands quiet before you, fertile, hopeful, and united. A single people sharing a single speech, gathered on an open plain that will one day become the center of a profound mystery. Nothing yet hints at the changes to come, the confusion, the dispersal, the myths that would echo through civilizations. For now, there is only calm, companionship, and the first trembling threads of a story that will shape the world's understanding of language, pride, and the desire to touch the heavens. Let this peaceful beginning settle softly into your thoughts as you prepare to follow the journey further. Tonight, you are not a learner or an observer. You are a traveler moving through the earliest chapters of human memory, guided gently by the quiet voice of history. Imagine the earth in the quiet centuries after the Great Flood, a world still settling, still reshaping itself under the weight of renewal. The land carries a softness, as though it has been washed and smoothed by the retreating waters. Rivers flow more gently now, tracing new paths across plains that had once been submerged. Mountains stand freshly sculpted, their slopes cleared of old debris, as if nature itself had taken a slow, steady breath to begin again. In this early period, there is a lingering sense of calm, like the hush that follows a passing storm. Humanity, small in number but filled with determination, walks carefully upon a world that feels both familiar and transformed. The first generations after the flood carry stories in their memories. Stories of what happened before, stories of destruction, survival, loss, and rebirth. Their elders recount tales of the waters rising beyond imagination, of the ark carried by the tides, of the hopes preserved through faith and endurance. But as the years pass, as children replace elders and elders become figures of memory, the stories soften into legend. They become gentle reminders of fragility and resilience rather than vivid warnings. The land they walk on no longer trembles with fear. Instead, it rests under the quiet steps of people who want nothing more than to rebuild their lives with purpose. As these early families move across the landscape, they seek places where the soil is rich and the water flows steadily. They follow the gentle pull of rivers, the natural lifelines that guide them toward fertile plains. These journeys are not hurried. They do not travel with the urgency of refugees fleeing danger, but with the calm patience of people who know the world is open before them. They carry children, tools, and memories. At night, they gather around small fires beneath a sky bright with stars, talking softly about where they might settle next. Their unity is unbroken, their language shared, their trust in one another deep. The earth at this time feels wide and quiet. Forests stretch far into the distance, filled with the rustle of leaves and the gentle movement of animals reclaiming their habitats. The plains are vast, dotted with new growth. Birds return to the skies, filling the air with unbroken melodies. There is a sense that everything is beginning again, not just for the land but for the people as well. The world is no longer a place of destruction, it is a canvas waiting to be shaped. Within these early families are the descendants of Noah, individuals bound by ancestry and purpose. They carry within them a collective memory of unity. The stories passed down to them teach not only of survival but also of cooperation. Every task is shared. Farming, hunting, gathering, building. The work is done in a rhythm that reflects the order they believe the world was meant to have. They move as one, their goals aligned by the simple desire to create a stable home for future generations. This unity is natural, effortless, and unchallenged by differences of tongue or culture. In this post-flood world, the sense of community is strong. People rely on one another not out of necessity alone, but because they genuinely see themselves as a single people. The idea of separation or division is foreign to them. They have no concept of borders, tribes, or nations. Every person they meet understands their words. Every gesture holds the same meaning. In such an environment, cooperation flourishes naturally, and trust becomes the foundation of their existence. It is a world where misunderstanding has no foothold, and unity has no rival. As these families grow and expand, they begin spreading across new territories. Some move toward the distant mountains. Others follow the winding rivers into the plains. Eventually, groups venture farther until they reach a broad, open land, the plain of Shinar. It is a place that stretches in all directions, wide and fertile, with soil soft enough to cultivate and space generous enough to house growing communities. The earth here seems to welcome them, offering the promise of abundance. When the first settlers reach Shinar, they pause and look out across its vastness. The horizon feels endless. The sky hangs gently above them, painted in hues of soft blues and warm golds. There is a quiet in the air that soothes their hearts. They sense that this land could become more than a temporary stop. It could be home, a place to plant roots, to raise families, and to build something lasting. Slowly, more families arrive, drawn by the same promise. Campfires begin to glow across the plain, forming small clusters of light beneath the night sky. Days turn into weeks, and weeks into months. The first shelters rise, simple structures made from earth, clay, and the materials the land provides. People share meals, stories, and dreams. Their shared language binds them, allowing ideas to flow freely among them. The unity they have always known deepens as they work together to build a life in this new land. Children play in the open fields. Adults labor with steady hands. Elders sit beneath newly planted trees, watching with quiet satisfaction as the community grows. As the population increases, life in Shinar becomes more structured, more coordinated. People begin to specialize in tasks based on their strengths. Some become skilled in agriculture, cultivating grains, and tending to livestock. Others learn to craft tools or shape clay into bricks. Some explore nearby areas, mapping the land to understand its resources. Although their world remains simple compared to future civilizations, the seeds of progress are already taking root. In the evenings, after the day's work is done, the families gather to rest. The fires crackle softly, sending warm sparks into the cool air. Stories are shared, stories of the flood, of ancestors, of divine protection, and of future hopes. But alongside these old stories, new ideas begin to whisper through the community. Ideas about building not just homes, but something greater. Something that would stand as a testament to their unity, their vision, and their determination. In this gentle era, ambition is not yet loud or forceful. It emerges slowly, like a breeze stirring the leaves. It comes from the hearts of people who look around and realize that together, they can shape their world. Their shared language creates a harmony in planning. Their shared purpose strengthens every decision. Their trust in one another removes hesitation. Every member feels part of something larger, something meaningful. And so, in this calm post-flood world, with peace in their hearts and fertile land beneath their feet, humanity prepares unknowingly to take its next great step. A step that will lead them to imagine a structure unlike anything they, or the world, have ever seen. A structure that will become a symbol for centuries to come. But for now, the people rest in unity, unaware of the profound journey ahead. In the quiet generations that followed the resettling of the earth, as families grew and communities spread across the open plains, a single figure began to rise in the shared memory of the people, slowly at first, like a distant shape forming beyond the horizon. His name would echo through centuries of legend, woven into scriptures, folklore, and whispered tales told beside ancient fires. This figure was Nimrod, a man whose presence cast a long shadow over the early chapters of humanity's story. To some, he was a great leader, to others, a hunter of unparalleled skill, and in certain traditions, a ruler whose ambition reached beyond the ordinary. Yet within these stories, there is always a softness, a sense that his life was shaped not just by power, but by the vast, fresh world he inherited. Imagine this world once more, calm plains stretching far into the distance, dotted with clusters of early settlements. People live close to the rhythms of nature, guided by the rising and setting of the sun. It is a world in which a strong leader can influence the direction of entire communities, not through armies or grand thrones, but through presence, charisma, and the ability to unite people in purpose. Nimrod emerges in such a time, born into a lineage known for survival and resilience. From his earliest days, the stories say, he possessed a certain gravity, a quiet authority that made others look to him with curiosity and respect. As he grew, Nimrod became known as a mighty hunter, a title that held far deeper meaning in those early eras than it does today. Hunting was not a sport, it was a necessity for survival, a skill that demanded strength, patience, and an understanding of the land. A hunter of renown was not just someone who could fell great animals, but someone who could provide for families, guide others through wilderness, and protect communities from the dangers that lingered in the wild. People trusted such a person. They followed him. They listened to him. Nimrod's reputation slowly expanded, not through boastful words, but through consistent presence and the quiet confidence of someone who understood the land intimately. There is a calmness in imagining him walking across the plains, his steps steady, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He would have known the early world not from stories, but from miles of open terrain beneath his feet. He would have watched the plains shift with the seasons, seen the rivers swell and recede, tracked the movement of herds, and understood the patterns of nature that others might overlook. In this soft, ancient landscape, his skill set made him invaluable. People naturally gravitated toward him, drawn by the assurance he provided simply by being who he was. Over time, as communities grew more settled and began thinking of permanence rather than constant movement, Nimrod's influence expanded from hunting to leadership. People sought his guidance, asked him to arbitrate disputes, and followed his advice on where to build, how to protect their families, and how to cooperate as numbers increased. Leadership in this era was not rigid or formal. It flowed from the trust of those who lived closely together. And so Nimrod slowly assumed a role that was both natural and significant, a role that shaped the destiny of the early world. Legends describe him as a mighty figure, and while the precise meaning of this word has been debated across centuries, in the gentle context of this storytelling, it is enough to understand that Nimrod possessed a strength of presence that set him apart. He inspired others not through fear, but through certainty. His voice carried weight. His actions were watched and often mirrored. When he walked through the growing settlements, people paused to greet him with familiarity and respect. Children whispered his name with awe, and adults found comfort in knowing that such a capable person walked among them. As more families gathered in the plain of Shinar, the need for organized leadership grew clearer. Communities that had once been scattered now lived close enough for shared goals, shared challenges, and shared dreams. Nimrod, with his natural authority, became a central figure in coordinating efforts, settling disagreements, and guiding the direction of future plans. In the soft glow of evening fires, people spoke of his wisdom, his courage, and his ability to unite disparate groups into one cooperative whole. But Nimrod was not remembered solely for his strength or leadership. There was another thread woven through his legend: ambition. Not ambition in a harsh, forceful sense, but a deep desire to build something meaningful, to shape the world in a way that reflected human unity and purpose. The world was still young. There were no towering cities, no monumental achievements carved into the landscape. Humanity was only beginning to imagine what it was capable of creating together. Nimrod, viewing the vast openness of Shinar, may have sensed that the time had come for people to attempt something greater than mere survival. You can imagine him standing at the edge of a rising settlement, gazing at the sunlit horizon. The air is warm, the earth fertile, and the people around him are united in language and purpose. In such a moment, one might easily wonder what humanity could accomplish if it worked not just to live, but to leave a mark, a mark that would endure, inspire, and define their place in the vast story of the world. It is within this quiet, contemplative environment that the idea of building something monumental could take root. Nimrod becomes, in many traditions, the figure who represents this shift from wandering to building, from surviving to aspiring. His ambition is intertwined with the ambitions of the people themselves. As they grow in number, skill, and confidence, their dreams naturally grow with them. And Nimrod, skilled in leadership and respected by the community, stands at the forefront of these changes. In some narratives, he is seen as a king, though not the kind of king we imagine today. There is no palace, no jeweled crown, no armies parading through wide streets. His kingship is symbolic, rooted in influence rather than formal power. He becomes a shepherd of people, guiding them toward the possibilities that lie ahead. The world around him is peaceful, but full of untapped potential. The soil is rich. The people are united. The future seems open in every direction. As night falls over Shinar, the people gather again around their fires. Their voices rise in gentle conversation, discussing plans for the next day, dreams of the future, and the guidance they receive from the leader they trust. Nimrod sits among them, listening, observing, and quietly planning. He sees in their unity a strength that is rare, perhaps even fragile. Yet he also sees an opportunity, a chance for humanity to build something that reflects its shared purpose. Something extraordinary. In this early world where the sky feels closer and the earth feels endless, Nimrod's presence grows into a symbol of human aspiration. He is a reminder that even in the simplest eras of our past, people dreamed of reaching higher, of creating, of shaping the world around them in ways that would echo far beyond their lifetimes. And it is from this atmosphere of unity, ambition, and gentle leadership that the story of the tower begins to form, like a distant outline rising slowly against the dawning sky. Far across the early world, where the plains stretch in gentle waves beneath a vast and open sky, lies a land that would become the quiet cradle of one of humanity's most enduring mysteries. This place, known in ancient texts as Shinar, waits under the warm sun and cool moonlight, carried by a calm rhythm of days and nights. To imagine Shinar at this time is to imagine a world untouched by the noise of civilizations that would come centuries later. There are no crowded streets, no towering walls, no echoing marketplaces. Only open, fertile ground and a horizon that seems to breathe with possibility. As the descendants of the early families drift slowly into this region, the land welcomes them with an almost serene generosity. The soil, dark and rich, breaks easily beneath their hands. Riverbeds snake quietly through the plains, feeding the land with life-giving water that glimmers in the sunlight. Shinar feels expansive, like a canvas waiting patiently for the shapes and colors of human imagination. The wind here carries a gentle hum, brushing through grasses that sway softly as if greeting each newcomer with a whisper of encouragement. Walking into Shinar is like stepping into a deep, ancient silence, the kind that makes you slow your breathing without realizing it. The plains spread out in every direction, their wide openness creating a sense of peace that settles naturally into the hearts of those who arrive. People building their small, early homes feel an unusual ease here, as though the land itself wishes to play a role in their story. Nights are cool and star-filled, with the sky stretched so wide that it seems to cradle the earth below. During the day, the warm sun drapes the plains in gold, inviting life to flourish in all its quiet forms. The people who settle here quickly notice how the land differs from the places they traveled before. Shinar is neither densely forested nor barren. It is a gentle balance of openness and resources. The rivers that weave through it offer fish and fertile banks. The distant hills provide clay and stone. The flat ground makes it easy to gather, easy to build, and even easier for large groups to work side by side. For a society that shares a single language and a single purpose, Shinar's vastness feels almost perfectly tailored for unity. Life in the plain begins with simple routines. Small clusters of homes rise along the soft riverbanks. Families plant seeds in the welcoming soil. Children play in the open fields under the watchful eyes of their elders. The community grows, not in haste, but with a comfortable rhythm that mirrors the gentle flow of the rivers. Every new family that arrives carries with it a sense of wonder at the openness of the land. There is space enough for all and more. At night, when the fires glow warmly across the plain, the air fills with the soft murmur of voices. People speak of their journeys, their hopes, their memories of lands left behind. They notice how sound travels here, smoothly, without interruption, across the flat ground. It is as though Shinar allows communication to stretch far, reinforcing their unity with every shared breath. Their single language flows freely, unbroken by dialect or distance, carried effortlessly from village to village. As more families arrive, the plains begin to transform with subtle signs of a growing society. Paths appear where feet often tread. Patches of cultivated land expand outward. Clay bricks dry in the sun near riverbanks. The early settlements are humble, made from simple materials shaped by skilled hands. Yet there is a quiet feeling that something greater is taking form, something woven into the very atmosphere of the plain. Shinar offers not only space but a sense of potential that touches the minds of the people. When they look around, they see land that stretches far enough to hold their imagination. They see hills that could support lookout points, riverbanks that could support farms, and vast open spaces where ideas might take shape, unhindered by physical limitations. It is this blend of openness and opportunity that begins to stir something deeper within the community, an unspoken curiosity about what they might achieve together. As the settlements grow, so does the confidence of the people. They feel safe in Shinar, sheltered not by walls but by the unity of their culture and the stability of the land. The plain becomes more than just a home. It becomes a foundation. And like any foundation, it invites thoughts of building, creating, reaching upward or outward in ways they had not considered before. The simplicity of their daily lives begins to merge with a subtle, collective ambition that gently shapes their future. During the long afternoons, as the sun casts warm light across the plain, groups of workers gather near riverbanks, shaping clay into bricks. There is a steady rhythm to their movements, a harmonious sound that blends naturally with the quiet landscape. Women prepare food near shaded areas, children gather water from the streams, and elders sit beneath makeshift awnings, watching the community move with a serenity rarely imagined in later eras. Everything here feels balanced, human effort and natural abundance working together in peaceful partnership. Evenings are the most magical time in Shinar. As the sky darkens and the stars begin to shimmer, the plains glow faintly from the scattered fires of dozens of small communities. People sit close together, sharing food, stories, and laughter. Far from feeling isolated in such a vast land, the people of Shinar feel more connected than ever. Their voices drift across the open air, overlapping and merging into a soft tapestry of sound. The peaceful nights here create a sense of belonging that strengthens with every passing day. The elders often speak of Shinar as a place chosen for them, a land that seems designed to nurture their growth. The younger generations who only know this place as home see its vastness as a playground of possibility. And the leaders among them, watching the community flourish, begin to envision a future shaped by shared dreams rather than mere survival. They stand on the edge of the plain and see not emptiness, but potential, a space where humanity might create something bold, something magnificent. Shinar, with its stillness and spacious beauty, gently encourages such dreams. The land seems to ask softly, "What will you do with all of this space? What will you build upon this foundation? How far will your unity take you?" And though no monument rises yet, no grand structure touches the sky, the idea has already begun to flicker like a spark in the hearts of the people. The plain of Shinar, simple and serene, becomes the silent stage on which one of the most mysterious chapters of early humanity will soon unfold. For now, the land rests peacefully beneath the ancient sky, open, fertile, waiting. And the people rest upon it, unaware that their unity, their ambition, and their harmony will soon give birth to a story that echoes through time. As the days passed in the peaceful plain of Shinar, a subtle shift began to ripple through the hearts of the people. It did not arrive with force or urgency, but gently, like the first faint glow of dawn brushing across the horizon. Life had become steady and secure. The land was generous, the communities were united, and the once fragmented families of the early world now lived with a shared sense of harmony. Yet within this comfort, something new began to stir, an unusual ambition, soft at first but growing in quiet corners of the mind. It started with simple questions whispered near evening fires. What could they create together, now that survival was no longer their only concern? How far could their shared strength carry them? What lasting mark might they leave upon the earth? These questions were not born from discontent but from curiosity, from a collective imagination awakening after years of peaceful routine. The people were not restless but thoughtful. They had tasted unity and now wondered what unity could achieve. As they worked each day, their thoughts drifted upward. They would look at the wide skies stretching endlessly above them, pure, unbroken, infinite. To some, it seemed to call out with an invitation. To others, it appeared as a challenge or a mystery. It shimmered during the heat of day and glowed silver under the moonlight. The sky felt closer here, as though the plane itself brought humanity nearer to the heavens. And perhaps it was this sense of closeness that started to shape an idea deep within their hearts, the desire to rise, to reach, to build something monumental. In their calm conversations, the people began to speak of legacy, not in grand philosophical terms, but with quiet sincerity. They wanted to remain together, to resist the dispersal that had scattered their ancestors across the world. They enjoyed their unity, their shared language, their familiar faces. They feared the day when their numbers might grow so large that they would drift apart. And so they pondered the idea of creating something that would bind them, a symbol of their togetherness. The thought took root slowly, nourished by the open skies and the fertile land. They wanted to make a name for themselves, as the old traditions later phrased it. But in this peaceful beginning, the desire was not one of arrogance. It was not about dominating or conquering. It was a longing for permanence, a wish to create a mark that the winds of time could not easily erase. Something that would stand tall and remind future generations that once, humanity lived as one. Imagine them working in the fields, shaping clay by the river, tending crops beneath the warm light. As they paused to rest, eyes naturally drifted upward. The birds soared effortlessly across the sky, their shadows gliding across the plains. Clouds gathered and drifted like wandering spirits. The sky became both muse and mystery. And in this early world, where imagination often blended with spirituality, it was easy for ambitions to become intertwined with the heavens themselves. Parents spoke softly to their children about what their community could become. Elders reminisced about the early days after the flood, when unity had been essential to survival. Younger men and women, full of energy and hope, dreamed of building something that would align with the strength of their growing population. A quiet determination began to take shape in the collective mind, not expressed loudly, but felt deeply. The more they imagined, the more their hearts resonated with the same unspoken thought. They wanted to build something tall, something grand, something that would rise from the earth and point toward the heavens like a gesture of unity. They wanted to create a structure so unforgettable that no matter how many generations passed, its story would echo through time. Whether this was driven by spiritual longing, human pride, or the simple desire for permanence, no one could say for certain. But the feeling was mutual, and it grew stronger with each passing day. The plain of Shinar fed this ambition. Its vast emptiness offered room for thought, room for dreams, and room for a structure unlike anything the world had seen. Its wide horizon made the idea seem natural. If ever there was a place where humanity could reach upward, surely it was here. When the sun set, casting long golden light across the plains, the people felt small yet connected, united under a single sky. This shared sky became the silent witness to their growing desire. In the evenings, as they gathered around their softly glowing fires, they began to imagine the future. What if they built a great city here, a central place for all families to gather? What if they built a tower rising from its center, a point of connection between earth and sky? Such a structure would give them identity, a shared purpose, a lasting symbol of unity. It would remind them of who they were and what they could accomplish together. Without realizing it, their ambition began to take shape not as a fleeting dream, but as a plan. They spoke of it casually at first. Someone would mention the possibility over a warm meal. Another would suggest materials that could be used. Elders would nod thoughtfully, considering the symbolic significance. The idea wove itself into their daily conversations, becoming a familiar presence in their thoughts. And yet, this ambition was not loud. It did not disrupt their peace or their bedtime stories. It was gentle, like a seed carried by the wind, settling into fertile soil. It grew in silence, nurtured by unity and the calm harmony of their lives. The people did not feel rushed to act. They simply allowed the idea to blossom naturally as their hearts aligned with one another. There was no sense of competition, no urge to outdo others. Their ambition came from a place of togetherness, from the desire to remain connected, to avoid drifting into separate tribes as the world expanded. They believed that by building something magnificent, they would preserve the unity they cherished. And so, in the quiet plain of Shinar, under the watchful sky and the gentle flow of the river, the people began to dream of a tower that would rise above their world, a tower that would define their identity, a tower that would stand as a testament to their ambition and their bond. This desire, unusual but deeply human, settled softly into their hearts, preparing them for a monumental journey they had not yet fully imagined. For now, the idea remained only a whisper, drifting through the evening air as the fires flickered and the stars appeared. But soon, this whisper would become action. And the tower, born from their unity and their unusual ambition, would begin to rise. Even as the gods began to withdraw, humanity continued to thrive, unaware that the very foundation of their world was shifting. Cities rose higher, empires spread wider, and knowledge expanded into territories that had once been considered sacred. Scholars charted the stars, artists painted with colors that had never existed in nature, and engineers carved monuments from stone as if daring the heavens to notice. Progress, once guided by divine hands, now moved by human ambition alone. It was a time of extraordinary ingenuity, a golden age of mortal achievement. Yet beneath the triumph lay a subtle unease, a sense that something vital had slipped away, like a river quietly changing course. The gods, observing from their distant realms, felt both pride and sorrow. They saw what humanity could accomplish and remembered the early days when wonder had driven every action. But now, that same drive was accompanied by hubris, a quiet arrogance that believed the world could be understood, controlled, and shaped without regard for the unseen forces that had once governed it. Mortals had become architects of their own destiny, and in doing so, had unknowingly crossed into the domain once reserved for divinity. Each invention, each conquest, each philosophical breakthrough was a step further into independence, and a step further from the intimacy that had defined the sacred bargain. This independence, however, was not without consequence. Though humanity gained power, it also inherited the void left by absence. Where once the divine had offered guidance, there was now silence. Rivers flowed without song, forests breathed without eyes, the wind moved without the knowing touch of the unseen. Mortals, who had once felt the presence of the gods in every sunrise, now looked only at the mechanics of the world. The sacred pulse that had intertwined life and cosmos had faded into abstraction. People could measure lightning but no longer tremble at its divine voice. They could name the stars but no longer feel their eyes upon them. The intimacy of the universe had been replaced with comprehension, and with comprehension came emptiness. In response, myths began to shift. Legends of gods walking among men transformed into stories of distant beings who had grown tired of mortal weakness. Heroes were no longer simply vessels of divine will but challengers of fate itself. Temples that once hummed with life became museums of memory, filled with stone idols that no longer breathed. Priests and prophets adapted, offering rituals designed to mimic the intimacy of an age long gone, hoping to rekindle the flickering presence that could no longer be taken for granted. Yet all these efforts were only shadows, echoes of a closeness that had been abandoned by necessity, not neglect. The moral of these stories became clear: humanity could act, create, and achieve, but the cost was distance from the divine. Every discovery carried the shadow of isolation. Every act of power reminded mortals that they were alone in shaping the world. Science replaced prayer, strategy replaced devotion, and logic replaced wonder. Where once a storm was a god's temper, now it was merely an event to be calculated. The very forces that had inspired reverence were now instruments for human use. And though humanity celebrated its achievements, there lingered a faint, nagging question in every heart. Had we traded guidance for freedom, or had we lost something irreplaceable? Some sensed the absence more keenly than others. Mystics, seers, and poets wrote of a time when the world had been alive in ways now forgotten. They spoke of eyes in the wind, voices in the trees, and stars that once watched with intent rather than indifference. Their writings became faint lanterns, illuminating a path to a past that existed more in memory than in reality. Yet even as they cautioned, most mortals were too busy with the tangible to heed the intangible. They had mastered the material world but were blind to the spiritual one. The gods had withdrawn so gradually that the loss was barely noticed until it became absolute, and by then, absence had become the norm. It was not, however, total abandonment. Occasionally, glimpses of the divine pierced the veil. A sudden epiphany, a dream of impossible clarity, a coincidence so precise it could not be explained. In these moments, mortals were reminded that the gods had not vanished completely. They were hidden, patient, observing the human world as one might watch a child growing into independence. These fleeting moments carried both joy and sorrow, joy for the reminder of what had once been, sorrow for the understanding that such moments were rare and fragile. The divine no longer intervened directly. Its voice had become subtle, almost imperceptible, a whisper in the wind or a flicker in the heart. Civilizations adapted. Religions evolved, codifying rituals into rules, translating experience into doctrine. Philosophers and sages sought to bridge the gap left by divine withdrawal, offering ethics, morality, and purpose in human terms. Societies flourished under human ingenuity, yet the sacred intimacy that had once guided them remained elusive. Mortals could build empires, harness nature, and understand the stars, but the quiet knowing that once flowed from gods to man was gone. People succeeded, but something essential had been lost, the sense of being cherished by the cosmos itself. Even as the gods receded, their influence lingered in the fabric of creation. Mountains, oceans, and rivers retained traces of the original harmony, though few recognized them. Certain times and places carried a lingering resonance, a reminder of the age when the divine and mortal worlds had been entwined. Travelers, poets, and dreamers could sometimes feel it, a subtle hum beneath existence that spoke of unity long vanished. But for the majority, life continued as if the gods had never been near. Humanity's brilliance illuminated the world, yet the warmth of the divine had faded to a cold, distant memory. And so, the age of human ascendancy began. Humanity, having tasted the power once shared with the gods, pressed forward with confidence. The world expanded, technologies advanced, cities grew, and knowledge multiplied beyond imagination. But with every step, the distance grew. What had once been a shared journey with the divine became a solitary path of achievement. The gods had withdrawn, and humanity had flourished. But in the quiet moments, in the pause between victories, the emptiness of absence lingered. The world was brighter, louder, more magnificent, but somehow less alive. This era taught a profound lesson, one that would echo across generations. Greatness carries solitude. The gods' withdrawal was not punishment, but a natural consequence of independence. To gain mastery, humans had to bear the weight of absence. And yet, even in this solitude, there was beauty. Humanity's ingenuity, resilience, and capacity for wonder persisted, now entirely its own. The light that had once been shared now burned within mortal hands. The gods had receded, leaving creation in human care. The world was theirs to shape, for better or worse, and the echoes of what had been would whisper forever in the spaces between what was lost and what had been gained. In the aftermath of divine withdrawal, the world took on a new rhythm, one dictated not by gods but by human hands. Civilization thrived, yet a quiet emptiness lingered beneath the surface, subtle as the shadow cast by a fading sun. People continued their rituals, lighting fires, singing songs, and offering prayers, But these acts were no longer conversations with living beings. They were gestures of memory, attempts to touch a past that had slipped just beyond reach. The presence of divinity had become a whisper in the wind, a reflection in the water, a fleeting glimpse in the corner of the eye. Mortals were left to navigate a world filled with beauty and mystery, yet without the guidance they had once known so intimately. Cities rose and empires expanded, monuments stretching toward the sky as if to reclaim the closeness that had been lost. Scholars charted the heavens, writing equations and stories that sought to capture the patterns of the cosmos. Artists painted and sculpted visions of gods that could no longer walk among men, immortalizing memory and imagination in marble, canvas, and ink. Every achievement became a testament to human resilience and ingenuity, yet it was tinged with a quiet sorrow. The divine eyes that once witnessed these creations were no longer present. People could measure the stars but no longer converse with them. They could capture beauty, yet the living warmth behind it had faded. Religion evolved in response to this absence. Temples, once alive with divine presence, became sanctuaries of reflection rather than interaction. Priests interpreted texts, sages offered counsel, and mystics sought signs in nature and dreams. Rituals persisted, now more symbolic than participatory, preserving the form of devotion even as the essence dwindled. Offerings were made with care, yet their power felt diminished. Prayer had become a monologue rather than a dialogue. The sacred covenant that had once united heaven and earth had been transformed into a series of reminders that something greater had existed and might still exist, if only mortals could perceive it. The gods, though withdrawn, had not abandoned entirely. Their presence lingered in subtle ways: the glimmer of light on water, the sudden clarity of insight, the inexplicable timing of events. These fragments of divinity were rare and often fleeting, leaving mortals with glimpses that could inspire awe, reflection, or fear. Some interpreted them as miracles, others as coincidence. The veil between mortal and divine had become thin in certain moments, but thick enough that most could not pierce it with certainty. Humanity lived in a world shaped by gods yet governed by human agency, suspended in the tension between memory and reality, longing and independence. As knowledge advanced, humans began to rely less on the unseen and more on the tangible. The patterns of nature were studied, the secrets of the earth uncovered, and the laws of the cosmos described in words and numbers. Technology advanced, medicine extended life, and empires expanded. Yet, with every discovery, the mystery receded. What had once been sacred was now understood, controlled, and replicated. The divine had taught humans to be creators, and they had embraced the gift fully. But in doing so, they closed the door to intimacy with the gods, replacing awe with comprehension, reverence with mastery. Still, in pockets of the world, humans remembered differently. Small villages, isolated temples, and wandering ascetics preserved the old ways. They maintained traditions that echoed the days of divine presence, songs that spoke to unseen ears, offerings laid with intention, silent moments held in hope rather than expectation. In these spaces, the gods were not absent but quietly near, their essence detectable only to those who sought with humility and patience. The contrast between these enclaves and the bustling centers of human progress highlighted the cost of independence. The deeper humanity reached toward mastery, the more it forgot the simple wonder of being watched and loved. Legends grew in parallel with progress. Tales of heroes, sages, and wanderers who glimpsed the divine became part of the cultural memory, shaping ethics, inspiring art, and guiding society. Gods were remembered not as rulers but as archetypes, embodiments of wisdom, courage, and folly. Mortals could no longer summon them at will, but they could honor their influence through narrative. Stories became the bridge between worlds, a fragile thread connecting the living to the once-living presence of the divine. In every tale, there was both longing and instruction, a reminder of what had been and a caution of what might be lost forever. The gods themselves observed these developments with mixed emotions. They watched humanity rise, marveling at creativity, resilience, and ambition, yet grieving the intimacy that had been lost. Their withdrawal was not born of malice but necessity. Closeness demanded devotion, and devotion had diminished. Even in distance, however, the divine maintained subtle guidance, shaping events not through intervention but through influence, whispers, and omens. These gestures were delicate, imperceptible, yet powerful, steering humanity while preserving freedom, allowing mortals to walk alone yet not entirely without direction. In this era, the interplay between presence and absence became the defining characteristic of existence. Humanity flourished, yet the heart of the world beat quieter. Temples and shrines preserved memory, myths preserved wonder, and fleeting glimpses preserved possibility. Knowledge and independence grew, but the living connection that had once made the world sacred now existed primarily in perception, imagination, and quiet yearning. Mortals could measure the universe, build civilizations, and shape destinies, but they could not summon the warmth of divine presence at will. They were gifted and alone, magnificent yet incomplete. It was an age of paradox. Progress and isolation walked hand in hand, illuminating both the brilliance and the solitude of human endeavor. Every achievement carried the shadow of absence, every discovery whispered of what could no longer be taken for granted. Humanity had inherited power, knowledge, and creativity once nurtured by the gods, yet it had lost something essential: the immediacy of presence, the intimacy of being truly seen, and the tender oversight that had once guided the steps of every child, hunter, and king. The divine had become memory, the sacred had become symbol, and the bond that had once held the world together now existed mostly in imagination. And yet, in that quiet, there remained hope. The gods had not vanished entirely, and the subtle traces of their presence still lingered for those who sought them. Humanity, now more than ever, had the opportunity to rediscover the threads of connection, to remember the covenant in ways that went beyond ritual and knowledge. The world was theirs to shape, yet the possibility of reconnection endured, a whisper beneath the roar of civilization, a promise that even absence could carry. And so, as humans walked forward into their own power, they did so under a sky that had grown distant but not dead, in a world that was quieter but still capable of wonder, and in a cosmos that waited patiently, holding memory and possibility in the same breath. Even as humanity flourished in its independence, a subtle unease began to weave itself into the fabric of existence. It was a quiet tension, felt in moments of stillness, in the hush before storms, in the trembling of leaves under a wind that seemed to carry secrets. People were achieving greatness, yet the world carried an echo of absence, a trace of what had been lost when the gods began their withdrawal. Empires rose and fell, knowledge expanded, and cities sprawled across continents, yet an invisible horizon separated mortal ambition from the warmth of the divine. The sacred bargain, once a living connection between heaven and earth, had become a faint memory, and its fading created both freedom and longing in equal measure. Legends and myths transformed to accommodate this new reality. Stories of gods walking among humans became tales of distant watchers, archetypes of virtue or vice rather than immediate presences. Heroes and prophets were depicted striving not for divine favor but for mastery, for understanding, and for survival in a universe that had grown larger and quieter. Mortals still sought signs, omens, and glimpses of the divine, but these encounters were rare, fleeting, and often ambiguous. The gods had become shadows in the minds of humans, reflections of their past intimacy, glimpsed only in dreams, whispers, or the play of light across a landscape. Reverence remained, yet it was now a meditation, a remembrance, rather than a conversation. In the absence of direct guidance, humanity turned inward, seeking wisdom, morality, and meaning through their own observation and reflection. Philosophers charted ethics, scholars codified laws, and storytellers wove cautionary tales that preserved fragments of divine presence. Every innovation, from the harnessing of fire to the writing of laws, carried the echo of divine lessons once imparted, yet humans executed these gifts independently. This newfound autonomy produced brilliance, yet also uncertainty. Mortals could now command nature, manipulate life, and shape civilizations, but each success reminded them of the silent heavens that had once guided their hands. The gap between human capability and divine presence became a subtle ache, an almost imperceptible tension threading through all achievement. Even the gods, observing from afar, felt the consequences of this separation. They had gifted humanity with curiosity, intellect, and creativity, yet they were now witnessing their creations functioning with almost total independence. There was pride, certainly, in what humans had become, but it was tempered by grief and longing. The bond that had once intertwined mortal and divine had loosened, and with every generation, that bond became less tangible. The gods could still influence events, but they no longer shaped them directly. Their power was now subtle, hidden in coincidences, intuitive insights, and the mysterious currents of fate. In their withdrawal, the divine presence became a quiet force, felt rather than seen, a guiding light dimmed but not extinguished. Humanity, however, often misinterpreted this quiet. They took independence as proof that divine oversight was unnecessary, or that the gods had truly abandoned them. Temples, once centers of communion, became monuments to memory rather than living sanctuaries. Priests and scholars performed rituals more out of tradition than expectation. The sacred had become symbolic, the ritual, a bridge to a past few could truly feel. Yet the gods' essence lingered in the edges of reality, whispering in ways subtle enough to be ignored yet potent enough to influence the course of events. Dreams carried guidance, natural phenomena hinted at unseen forces, and chance encounters often held significance beyond immediate comprehension. In this new era, morality and choice took on renewed weight. Without direct oversight, humans became the architects not only of cities and knowledge but of their own ethical landscape. Decisions bore consequences unmediated by divine intervention, and the absence of gods forced a deeper responsibility for every action. Philosophers and sages flourished, pondering questions once answered by faith. They debated justice, the nature of virtue, and the limits of knowledge. These questions, once framed as obedience to divine law, now demanded human reasoning, reflection, and empathy. Mortals were learning to navigate a universe that no longer offered certainty, guided only by memory, intuition, and their own courage. Despite this autonomy, the divine left markers, subtle reminders of their presence that required careful perception. Mountains, rivers, and ancient forests retained echoes of the times when gods had walked the earth. Sacred sites, though rarely understood in their entirety, contained patterns and energies that hinted at former connections. Some humans, sensitive to these traces, felt awe in moments of silent meditation, a reminder that the world once breathed with consciousness beyond the human. These moments, though rare, preserved the hope that connection could be restored, not through ritual or domination, but through recognition, reverence, and mindful attention. Stories of rebellion, defiance, and consequence became central to culture. Prometheus, Loki, and other archetypal figures were remembered not simply for the chaos they caused, but for the lessons they imparted, that curiosity, ambition, and the desire for knowledge carried both power and responsibility. Each tale emphasized the delicate balance between mastery and humility, warning that independence without wisdom could lead to isolation and disconnection. Humans learned to admire ingenuity while recognizing the dangers of overreaching, internalizing a moral framework that had once been guided directly by gods. As human societies matured, art and literature became vessels for the divine memory. Paintings, sculptures, and stories preserved the sense of wonder and awe that once characterized everyday life. Even as direct communication with the gods had ceased, the cultural memory of their presence persisted, shaping identity and imagination. People began to understand that the divine was no longer something external to control or command. It was woven into the very act of existence, present in creativity, reflection, and the pursuit of understanding. This shift represented not the loss of gods, but a transformation. The sacred became internalized, residing within human perception as much as in the cosmos. And yet, the subtle ache of absence remained. Humanity's achievements were now tempered with introspection. Great empires, monumental architecture, and extraordinary technological advancement were impressive, yet in moments of silence, humans sensed the quiet that came with the gods' withdrawal. They no longer feared divine wrath, nor did they feel the warmth of constant presence. Instead, they stood between potential and responsibility, guided by memory, intuition, and the faint echo of what had been. This liminal space, the tension between what humans could do and what they had once been taught by gods, shaped a civilization both magnificent and precarious, capable of greatness yet always aware of a missing dimension. As centuries passed, the memory of the gods became more fragile, yet paradoxically more profound. Humans lived in a world shaped by divine influence but no longer guided by it, and this tension created both wonder and uncertainty. Great civilizations rose, their cities gleaming under suns that no longer bore the watchful eyes of gods, their streets filled with voices that sang songs of human ingenuity rather than divine favor. Temples, once bustling with the immediacy of worship, had become archives of devotion, storing knowledge of what had been rather than fostering dialogue with the eternal. Yet the essence of divinity lingered, subtle and pervasive, in ways both tangible and ephemeral, waiting to be perceived by those who looked with care. Legends evolved, carrying forward the echoes of divine presence. Tales of heroes and tricksters, of sages and immortals, were retold not simply to inspire, but to remind humanity of the lessons embedded in the Old Covenant. Prometheus's fire was no longer just a symbol of rebellion, it became a metaphor for the spark of human potential. Loki's cunning was remembered not as chaos alone, but as the cautionary guide to ambition without humility. Through these stories, the gods maintained influence indirectly, teaching through parable rather than direct intervention. The myths became mirrors in which mortals could see both their capabilities and their limitations, offering guidance while preserving independence. In this new world, humans became acutely aware of absence. The divine no longer intervened in storms or healings. Instead, people relied on observation, intellect, and collective wisdom. Astronomy, medicine, and engineering flourished as humanity sought to understand the laws that the gods had once embodied. Yet even as knowledge expanded, the emotional resonance of wonder became increasingly rare. Moments of awe were fleeting, often occurring in the quiet spaces between action, in the hush of dawn, the shimmer of moonlight on water, or the sudden clarity of insight. In these moments, people felt a connection that could not be explained, a subtle reminder that something greater lingered beyond perception. Ethics and morality transformed under this shadow of absence. Without the immediate presence of gods, humans had to cultivate conscience, justice, and empathy through reflection and experience. Philosophers and sages debated not divine command, but principles that could guide society through complexity and uncertainty. Laws were constructed to reflect both human ingenuity and caution, acknowledging the freedom that had been granted, yet mindful of the lessons woven into memory. Independence was exhilarating, but it carried a weight, the understanding that missteps were fully human, consequences unavoidable, and guidance no longer guaranteed. This delicate balance shaped civilizations capable of remarkable innovation while demanding wisdom in equal measure. Art and culture flourished as humans sought to preserve the memory of divinity. Paintings depicted gods in forms no longer present, sculptures captured fleeting glimpses of immortals, and poetry celebrated the echoes of sacred intimacy. These creative acts were both homage and exploration, a means to bridge the growing gap between the mortal and divine. They were also tools for reflection, reminding communities that the absence of gods did not negate their influence, but transformed it. Humans were learning to inhabit a world in which the sacred could no longer be commanded, but could still be felt, interpreted, and honored. Despite this adaptation, the tension of absence persisted. People could accomplish remarkable feats, yet the universe retained a subtle, almost imperceptible weight, a reminder that what had once been intimate and immediate was now distant. Natural phenomena were studied and understood, but their wonder remained, though now mediated through observation rather than reverence. Storms, rivers, and forests continued to carry traces of divine energy, accessible only to those who could perceive subtle patterns or pause long enough to sense them. Humanity's power had grown, yet it was tempered by a quiet knowledge that mastery did not equate to understanding, and control did not equal communion. The withdrawal of the gods also inspired introspection. Humans began to question not only their place in the world, but the nature of divinity itself. What did it mean for the gods to step back? Was their absence a judgment, a gift, or a necessary condition for growth? These questions did not have simple answers, yet they shaped philosophy, religion, and culture profoundly. Humans came to realize that the divine could not always be measured, commanded, or even fully comprehended. It existed as a presence that required perception, patience, and humility. This awareness, though often subtle, became a foundation for a deeper, more mature engagement with both the cosmos and human potential. In this age, rare individuals became intermediaries of remembrance. Mystics, visionaries, and dreamers occasionally glimpsed the divine in ways ordinary mortals could not. They interpreted these encounters, translating fleeting experiences into teachings, rituals, and guidance for others. Yet even these moments were partial, fragile, and easily misinterpreted. The gods no longer revealed themselves in the fullness of presence. Their communication had become layered, symbolic, and indirect. Understanding required dedication, reflection, and a willingness to seek beyond the obvious. Those who succeeded often became revered, not as vessels of divine command, but as keepers of memory and insight. The contrast between presence and absence shaped culture at every level. Monarchs, citizens, scholars, and artists all operated in a world in which human initiative had taken the forefront, yet the shadow of gods lingered. Achievements were celebrated, discoveries documented, and civilizations expanded, but the quiet knowledge that something greater had once walked among them never fully vanished. Humanity's imagination preserved the sacred, creating a living dialogue between memory and creation, between absence and aspiration. Every action, whether mundane or monumental, carried with it the implicit challenge of living responsibly in a world partially untethered from divine oversight. And so, humanity evolved into a species of paradoxes, powerful, ingenious, and independent, yet haunted by the memory of intimacy now lost. The divine, once immediate and commanding, had become subtle and indirect, yet no less influential in shaping culture, morality, and imagination. Mortals stood as both inheritors and custodians, capable of greatness, yet always aware of the invisible horizon that marked the limit of human perception. It was a time of both triumph and reflection, of achievement tempered by introspection, of mastery paired with longing. The world had grown larger, more intricate, and more human, and yet it carried the soft, persistent echo of gods who had once walked among them and now watched quietly, waiting for recognition, remembrance, and perhaps reconciliation. The centuries following the gods' withdrawal brought both remarkable progress and subtle unrest. Humanity had learned to navigate the world with its own ingenuity, crafting civilizations, technologies, and philosophies that surpassed what had been imagined in earlier eras. Yet, beneath every triumph, there existed an unspoken awareness of absence. Even as empires expanded and knowledge deepened, there remained a quiet echo of something once intimate and alive, a presence that had guided, nurtured, and inspired in ways no mortal achievement could replicate. People sensed it in the rhythm of the seasons, the patterns of the stars, and the occasional inexplicable coincidence that defied explanation. These subtle signs were reminders that the world had once been alive with a consciousness far beyond human understanding. In the realm of art and culture, humans sought to bridge this widening gap. Painters, sculptors, and poets worked tirelessly to capture the essence of what had been lost, to preserve glimpses of the divine through human creativity. Temples became repositories not merely of worship but of memory, their walls inscribed with stories, rituals, and symbols that carried the echoes of gods who no longer walked among them. Musicians composed melodies intended to invoke presence, dancers performed movements that traced patterns of forgotten rites, and storytellers wove epics in which the gods' former intimacy was remembered in vivid detail. These efforts created spaces where the human mind could feel connection, even if direct contact had been severed, and reinforced the subtle truth that absence could itself inspire awe and reflection. Religion, too, evolved to accommodate the changed dynamic. Without the immediacy of divine guidance, spiritual practice became a discipline of interpretation and contemplation. Priests and philosophers guided communities by interpreting signs in nature, dreams, and human behavior, rather than delivering messages received directly from the gods. Rituals became symbolic frameworks, reminders of principles and values rather than instruments of direct communication. Mortals were invited to become active participants in sustaining the sacred, cultivating awareness, wisdom, and ethical insight in place of unquestioned obedience. The gods' withdrawal was not an abandonment but an invitation to independence, challenging humans to develop discernment, moral responsibility, and inner vision. Despite progress, moments of fear and doubt persisted. Without divine presence, disasters, natural and man-made, took on a more ominous dimension. Storms, earthquakes, and plagues reminded humanity of forces that could not be fully controlled. Wars and political upheavals, once tempered by appeals to divine justice, now relied entirely on human judgment. These crises reinforced a profound lesson: freedom from direct oversight carried both power and responsibility. Mortals could shape the world in unprecedented ways, but the consequences were theirs alone to bear. The divine, once a visible source of protection and guidance, now operated in whispers, leaving humans to confront both their accomplishments and their vulnerabilities in solitude. In philosophy, this era sparked profound inquiry. Thinkers debated the nature of existence, morality, and destiny in the absence of clear divine instruction. Questions arose that had previously been answered through revelation. What is justice when gods do not intervene? How can one act ethically without omniscient oversight? What does it mean to be human when humans alone govern the moral landscape? These inquiries deepened understanding of the self, society, and the cosmos, fostering an intellectual maturity that paralleled technological advancement. Humanity was no longer simply a recipient of divine instruction. It was now a conscious participant in shaping meaning, ethics, and destiny. The subtle presence of gods remained perceptible to those who paid close attention. Travelers, mystics, and dreamers reported encounters that were difficult to explain: a flash of insight, a sudden resolution to a problem, a moment of unanticipated clarity during meditation. These experiences reinforced the understanding that while the gods no longer intervened openly, they remained entwined with the world in quiet, delicate ways. Nature, it seemed, still carried their signatures: the curve of a river, the bloom of a rare flower, the flight of birds in synchronized harmony. Humanity, when attuned, could perceive these threads of connection, reminding them that the divine had not entirely vanished but had chosen subtlety and patience over immediacy. Societies responded by codifying knowledge, creating written records, maps, and calendars that sought to capture order from a universe no longer governed by direct divine oversight. Science, mathematics, and philosophy flourished, offering humans tools to navigate reality and predict outcomes previously understood only through faith. In this process, humans developed confidence, resourcefulness, and resilience. Yet the absence of gods imbued these achievements with a bittersweet quality. Triumphs were real and lasting, but they were accompanied by a recognition that mastery alone could not recreate the intimacy once shared between mortal and divine. Independence had been won, but at the cost of presence. Cultural memory became essential. Stories, myths, and rituals preserved knowledge of divine principles and patterns, acting as guides to moral, social, and environmental harmony. Elders, teachers, and artists served as custodians of these memories, ensuring that generations could access lessons embedded in a history now filtered through human interpretation. Education became not only about skill but about perception, imagination, and ethical awareness. Humanity learned that absence required reflection. It demanded mindfulness, reverence for life, and acknowledgement of the invisible threads connecting all things. In the personal sphere, this shift affected spirituality and introspection. People sought meaning in daily life, observing nature, practicing mindfulness, and meditating on the patterns of the universe. They came to understand that while divine guidance might be subtle, human attention, care, and ethical action could preserve the balance that had once been sustained through direct presence. Individuals cultivated virtues, not in response to commands, but from understanding and empathy. In this sense, absence became an instrument for growth, inviting humans to participate consciously in maintaining order, harmony, and moral integrity. Ultimately, this era forged a new kind of humanity, one capable of greatness, self-reflection, and ethical insight, yet always aware of a subtle void. The gods' withdrawal was not a simple loss. It was a transformation that demanded creativity, responsibility, and heightened perception. Humanity could achieve, understand, and create, yet it now had to do so in a universe where the divine was elusive and subtle, present only in whispers, echoes, and signs. The tension between independence and connection became the defining force of this period, shaping a civilization both brilliant and contemplative, aware of its power and the delicate balance required to wield it responsibly. As humanity progressed through the ages, a delicate tension emerged between mastery and longing. The gods' withdrawal had granted unprecedented freedom, allowing mortals to build, explore, and innovate on scales previously unimaginable. Cities expanded, knowledge deepened, and human imagination reached heights once reserved for divine vision. Yet beneath every achievement lay a quiet echo of absence, subtle and pervasive. People could measure the heavens, chart the courses of rivers, and dissect the mechanisms of life, but the warmth and immediacy of the divine gaze was no longer there to witness or guide. The world was alive with human ingenuity, yet it carried a soft, persistent whisper of something essential lost. Myths and legends evolved to reflect this new reality. Tales of gods walking among mortals became stories of distant observers, archetypes that embodied principles rather than immediate agents. Heroes were no longer recipients of divine favor but exemplars of human potential, often succeeding through courage, intelligence, and moral insight. Prometheus' fire symbolized the spark of creativity that humans could nurture independently. Loki's cunning reminded societies of the dangers of ambition unchecked by wisdom. Through these narratives, the divine continued to influence, not through direct intervention, but through memory, teaching, and allegory. The gods' lessons endured, challenging humans to internalize principles rather than follow commands. Humanity responded by cultivating ethical frameworks grounded in reason and reflection. Philosophers debated the nature of justice, virtue, and responsibility in a universe where divine oversight was subtle or absent. Laws, customs, and social norms became mechanisms to maintain harmony, not merely instruments of divine will. Society learned that freedom carried responsibility. Actions had consequences that could not be mitigated by supernatural intervention. Independence required discernment, empathy, and foresight, qualities that became increasingly valued across generations. In the absence of visible gods, moral and ethical development became a conscious, deliberate endeavor. Science and observation flourished as humans sought understanding of the cosmos and nature. Astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and engineering advanced rapidly, driven by curiosity and necessity. Humans learned to predict the movements of celestial bodies, harness the energy of rivers, and extend the boundaries of life itself. Yet, even as knowledge expanded, the subtle ache of absence persisted. The universe's workings could be understood and manipulated, but comprehension did not replace the sense of wonder and intimate connection once imparted by the gods. Every discovery illuminated both human brilliance and the lingering void left by their withdrawal. In the cultural sphere, art and literature became vessels of remembrance. Painters depicted gods as distant figures, capturing the grace and power that humans could no longer directly witness. Sculptures immortalized fleeting expressions of divine influence, and stories explored the moral and ethical lessons that had guided humanity in an earlier age. Music, dance, and ritual performance offered moments in which the sacred could be intuited, felt, and honored. These creative endeavors preserved the sense of the divine as an ever-present influence, even if its interaction with the world had become indirect and symbolic. The arts became a bridge between memory and imagination, guiding humanity toward a deeper understanding of both themselves and the universe. Despite this evolution, challenges arose. Natural disasters, disease, and political strife reminded humans that they operated within a cosmos that was complex, powerful, and sometimes indifferent. Wars were fought without divine arbitration. Plagues and famine demanded human ingenuity and resilience to survive. These trials reinforced a profound lesson. Autonomy carried responsibility, and absence carried the weight of consequence. Mortals were left to navigate uncertainty, to learn from experience, and to act with wisdom born of reflection rather than instruction. In this space between mastery and vulnerability, humanity grew both capable and cautious, recognizing the fine balance between achievement and humility. The subtle presence of the divine continued to be perceived by those attuned to it. Mystics, seers, and dreamers reported fleeting experiences of insight, guidance, or revelation that could not be explained by ordinary means. These moments served as reminders that while the gods no longer acted openly, they remained entwined with the world in quiet, almost imperceptible ways. Nature itself offered traces. The rhythm of tides, the patterns of weather, and the cycles of life seemed to carry purpose beyond human calculation. Humans who learned to observe carefully could detect these hints, discovering that absence was not emptiness but a more subtle form of presence, requiring awareness, patience, and humility. Education, knowledge, and cultural memory became central to preserving these lessons. Elders, teachers, and storytellers passed down myths, ethics, and practices that encoded divine wisdom in human terms. Societies learned to honor principles rather than expect miracles, to interpret guidance rather than demand it. Literature, ritual, and art became tools for transmitting insight across generations, shaping moral frameworks and cultural identity. Humanity began to understand that independence did not mean isolation. It meant the responsibility to perceive, learn, and act in alignment with both memory and reason. In daily life, individuals began to cultivate mindfulness and reflection as means of connecting with subtle divinity. Meditation, quiet observation, and ethical introspection became common practices, fostering a deeper awareness of the interconnectedness of all things. Humans recognized that even without immediate divine oversight, the universe was responsive to action, choice, and intention. The subtle threads of guidance could be felt in intuition, coincidence, and inspiration, shaping decisions in ways that encouraged balance, harmony, and ethical growth. The absence of gods had not removed their influence. It had transformed it, requiring humans to cultivate perception and discernment to engage with it meaningfully. Ultimately, this period defined humanity's evolution. Freed from direct divine control, humans had grown into architects of their own destiny, capable of immense achievement and profound reflection. Yet they remained connected to the divine through memory, symbol, and subtle signs embedded in nature, culture, and imagination. The absence of overt presence was not a void but a teaching, a call to cultivate wisdom, creativity, and moral responsibility. The tension between independence and remembrance shaped not only human achievement but human consciousness itself, creating a civilization that thrived under its own power while retaining the awareness of something greater, subtle, and eternal. Even as society advanced, there remained moments of quiet awe. The dawn, the stars, the bloom of rare flowers, and the intricate patterns of life offered glimpses of what had once been immediate and intimate. In the days that followed the sudden confusion of tongues, the plain of Shinar shifted from a place of unity to a place filled with quiet uncertainty. People who once understood one another with perfect ease now stood in small, scattered groups, each bound by a different pattern of speech. The tower, once alive with coordinated effort and shared ambition, now lay silent beneath the sun. Tools rested where they had been dropped. Ropes dangled unattended. Fresh bricks sat in neat rows, unused. A stillness settled over the plain, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The people did not yet know what to do. They walked through the familiar fields and settlements, trying to understand the new sounds coming from the mouths of their friends and neighbors. Some repeated words gently, hoping they might regain their shared understanding. Others gestured with hands and eyes, attempting to bridge the distance that had opened between them. But the divide between languages remained, soft yet permanent, like a quiet curtain that had fallen gently across their world. After the first days of confusion came the realization that life as they knew it could not continue in the same way. Their unity had been their strength. It had guided their work, their culture, their identity. Now, the sudden diversity of speech made cooperation difficult. Even small tasks became challenging. A simple instruction had to be expressed through gestures and guesses. Misunderstandings multiplied, not out of ill will but because words no longer held the same meaning from one person to the next. Families and friends clung to those who still understood them. People naturally formed small circles, grouping together with those whose speech felt familiar. These groups felt comfort in the soft rhythm of words that matched their own. They could share thoughts, fears, and plans without the barrier that now separated them from many of their neighbors. And slowly, gently, a new truth began to settle in. They could no longer remain together as one community. It was not an angry realization. There were no arguments, no violence, no dramatic separation. Instead, it was a quiet understanding that drifted through each group like a soft breeze. The plain of Shinar, once wide and welcoming, now felt too small for so many different voices. The people loved the land, loved the tower they had begun together, but they could not continue their lives in a place where communication had become so fragmented. And so, they gathered in small clusters beneath the open sky, sitting together in silence or speaking softly to those who understood, pondering the path ahead. When the time came to depart, it came gently. Each group looked out across the horizon and realized that the world was vast, with open lands stretching in every direction. They had talked often about the wide plains, distant mountains, flowing rivers, and fertile valleys beyond Shinar. Many had dreamed of exploring these places one day. Now, those dreams began to shimmer with new meaning. Perhaps the earth was inviting them to discover its hidden corners. Perhaps their new languages would lead them to new lands, new homes, new lives. And so, families gathered their belongings. Parents wrapped blankets around their children, packed tools and simple provisions, and tied bundles with careful knots. They looked once more at the tower rising quietly in the center of the plain, a reminder of what they had begun together. Some felt sadness, others nostalgia, others a quiet sense of wonder at the strange turn their lives had taken. None of them knew where their journeys would lead. But they felt a gentle pull toward the horizon, a soft urging to follow their own path. The first group began to walk toward the distant hills, their voices carrying behind them in a language now distinct from the others. Their footsteps rustled softly through the dry grass. Soon after, another group began walking in a different direction, drawn toward the line of trees bordering a far-off valley. A third group moved toward the north, where the air felt slightly cooler. One by one, the people of Shinar began to drift outward like petals carried by a quiet wind. The scattering was peaceful. There were no cries of despair or anger. Just the soft murmur of different languages, weaving through the warm air as families walked farther apart. The once crowded plain slowly grew quieter. The tower watched silently as the people who had built it dispersed across the earth, their voices fading into the distance. It stood like a memorial to a time when everyone spoke as one, when humanity shared a unified dream. As each group moved farther from Shinar, the landscape began to change around them. Some traveled into lush regions where rivers branched like silver threads. Others wandered through forests filled with towering trees and birdsong. Some came upon mountains that rose like giants from the earth, their peaks glowing softly in the morning light. Still others found themselves in rolling plains where wildflowers grew in gentle waves. The world revealed its diversity to them as they discovered new lands, new climates, new rhythms of life. Their languages continued to evolve as they traveled. New words formed to describe new landscapes. New sounds emerged to express new experiences. Over time, these differences deepened, shaping the identities of each group. What began as gentle variations in speech would eventually grow into entirely distinct tongues, languages that future generations would speak, write, and sing without ever knowing that they once shared a single origin in Shinar. As they settled in distant lands, each group built homes adapted to their surroundings. Some constructed houses of stone near mountains. Others built dwellings from timber in forested regions. Still others shaped clay structures along riverbanks. Their ways of living began to change, reflecting the climate, the land, and the needs of their new environment. Their cultures blossomed, each unique yet connected by a distant memory of unity. And though they no longer understood the words of those who remained behind in Shinar, or those who traveled in different directions, they carried the story of the tower with them. They told their children about the great structure they had once begun together. They remembered the time when all people spoke one language. They remembered their shared history, even if their paths had diverged. The story traveled far, whispered in new accents, shaped by new tongues, passed down through new generations who had never seen Shinar with their own eyes. In this gentle scattering of peoples, the foundation for future civilizations was laid. Diverse cultures would rise across continents. Different ways of speaking, thinking, building, and dreaming would take shape. And though the people no longer walked together or spoke the same way, the world itself began to grow richer, more varied, more vibrant. The scattering was not an end, but a beginning, a quiet unfolding of humanity into all the corners of the earth. A soft branching of one family into many. A journey into the unknown, guided not by fear, but by the quiet acceptance of a new reality. And as the people disappeared into the distance, the plain of Shinar remained still and silent, holding within it the memory of unity, the whisper of shared languages, and the unfinished tower that had once stood at the center of it all. As the groups drifted farther and farther from the plain of Shinar, spreading across valleys, forests, coastlines, and mountains, the world slowly began to reshape itself around them. The scattering of humanity, gentle as it was, became the first step in the unfolding of early civilizations. Though none of the people understood the magnitude of what was happening, their journeys would eventually plant the seeds of cultures that later ages would marvel at, cultures that rose from the echoes of Babel, carrying fragments of shared memory into distant lands. Those who traveled eastward found themselves walking across long, sweeping plains bathed in golden light. Rivers carved graceful paths through the earth, offering fertile soil and abundant water. Over time, these groups settled near the winding rivers of Tigris and Euphrates, where they began to cultivate crops more consistently, shaping the earliest forms of agriculture into refined practices. Their settlements grew gradually, marked by simple structures at first, then more organized layouts. These small communities would one day blossom into Sumer, one of the world's earliest civilizations, though the people themselves never grasped the scale of what they were creating. They simply lived, worked, and built in harmony with the land. To the south, another group moved closer to regions where the earth darkened and the climate shifted. They followed the flow of a mighty river that cut like a jewel through the desert, a river that would later be called the Nile. The new landscape was different from Shinar, narrower, greener along its center, flanked by endless dunes. Here, the people adapted to the rhythm of the river's floods, learning how to plant their crops with predictable cycles. Their homes rose along the water's edge. Their traditions shaped themselves around the sun, the river, and the stars. In time, this group would lay the foundations for what the world would later know as ancient Egypt, a civilization of temples, pyramids, and wisdom. But in these early days, they were simply families learning how to live beside a river that sustained them. Those who traveled northeast eventually entered rugged lands where the earth lifted into hills and mountains. The soil was rocky in places, rich in others. The changing elevations and varied climate encouraged them to develop new techniques for survival, herding animals, carving terraces into steep hillsides, learning to read the sky for weather patterns that changed more quickly than on the plains. Over generations, these people became resilient, adaptive, and closely connected to the land. Their settlements would one day contribute to the rise of the Akkadian and later Assyrian cultures, though in these early years, they lived quietly, feeling the mountains as both companions and guardians. Another group moved even farther east, following river systems into a land surrounded by thick forests and humid winds. The terrain became lush and dim under the canopy of ancient trees. The people learned to live among tall grasses, winding streams, and dense vegetation. They discovered plants they had never seen before, animals that moved quietly through the underbrush, and patterns of rainfall that differed dramatically from Shinar's calm skies. Over centuries, these groups would contribute to the early cultures of the Indus Valley, though at this moment in time, they were simply wanderers finding a new home in a world that felt mysterious and green. To the north, where the air grew cooler and the seasons harsher, group after group traveled into lands of wide valleys, thick forests, and long winters. Their speech evolved rapidly in the isolation of these colder regions, shaped by necessity and the rhythm of their environment. They learned to build stronger, insulated homes, to hunt animals that roamed in herds across snow-dusted plains, and to preserve food for the winter months. Over long stretches of time, their descendants would become the early Indo-European peoples whose languages would one day stretch across continents. But at the beginning, they were just families adjusting to the touch of cold wind on their faces. Farther still, some crossed mountain passes into lands of breathtaking altitude. Thin air, icy peaks, and vast open skies surrounded them. They built homes from stone, crafted tools resilient enough to survive the harsh climate, and found ways to thrive in environments few others could endure. Their days were marked by the movement of the sun across jagged horizons, and their nights by the glittering canopy of stars that seemed closer than anywhere else on Earth. Their languages developed unique rhythms, shaped by the echoing sound of voices surrounded by towering stone. Meanwhile, to the west, groups followed coastlines where waves lapped gently at the sand. Here, the air smelled of salt and warmth. Fish became an abundant source of food, and boats crafted from reeds and wood allowed them to explore waters beyond the shore. Some settled along beaches and cliffs, forming early coastal communities. Others followed the currents of warm winds into distant lands separated by water, early maritime wanderers whose descendants would one day populate islands and coastlines across vast oceans. Their speech evolved with the rhythm of waves, and their stories were filled with the sea's whisper. With each step across the earth, humanity blossomed into diversity. Cultures began to form slowly, almost silently, shaped by the landscapes that welcomed them. Different lands encouraged different traditions. Different climates encouraged different ways of living. Different challenges encouraged different solutions. And, of course, different languages guided different stories, values, and worlds of thought. Yet across all these newly forming cultures, there lingered a faint echo of unity, soft, almost forgotten, but present. Though the people no longer spoke the same words, they still carried memories of the world they came from, of the tower rising from Shinar, of the time when all voices flowed in unison. These memories softened their transitions into new lands, reminding them that even though their tongues had changed, their history remained shared. In some regions, families built simple shrines or markers to honor the journey they had endured. In others, they told stories of a great tower that had once united their ancestors. Over generations, these stories drifted and transformed, shaped by new accents, new interpretations, new environments. Some depicted the tower as a mountain, others as a stairway, others as a city of beginnings. Though the details differed, the essence remained the same, a story of a time when people were one. And so the early civilizations of the world took shape, not through sudden leaps or grand declarations, but through the gentle settling of families, the slow rise of traditions, and the quiet unfolding of human life across the earth. In valleys and deserts, forests and coastlines, mountains and plains, humanity planted itself like seeds carried by the wind, taking root in every corner of the planet. They could not have imagined that their descendants would one day build mighty kingdoms, write languages on stone tablets, construct monuments that reach toward the sky, or navigate oceans across unseen horizons. They did not know that the diversity born from their scattering would bring richness to the future. They only knew that they had found new homes, new lives, and new paths. From the echoes of Babel, the great civilizations of the ancient world would rise, each unique, each vibrant, each shaped by land, language, and memory. And though they had parted ways, the quiet thread of shared origin lay unbroken beneath it all, weaving itself gently through human history. When humanity scattered gently from the plain of Shinar, carried by new languages and quiet steps into distant lands, something remarkable began to unfold, something the people themselves did not yet understand. As families drifted farther apart, their words continued to shift and transform. Sounds changed shape. Meanings stretched and settled in new ways. Accents blossomed like wildflowers adapting to the climate around them. And slowly, across generations, the world became a tapestry of languages, each unique, each expressive, each carrying the quiet memory of a shared beginning. Language, like any living thing, evolved naturally. It grew with the people who spoke it, shaped by the landscapes they encountered, the challenges they faced, and the stories they told. In the forests, words softened to blend with the rustling of leaves. In the mountains, echoes shaped syllables into sharp, resilient sounds. Along the coasts, speech carried the rhythm of waves and wind. Across the deserts, words stretched long and slow, drifting like sand across the dunes. Each environment offered its own influence, guiding the evolution of vocabulary, tone, and structure. At first, the differences between languages were small. A single word borrowed, a new sound forming, a familiar phrase reshaped by a child's tongue. But as generations passed, these differences deepened. Younger voices learned to speak only the languages of their families, unaware that their ancestors had once spoken as one. They developed words for their new surroundings, names for unfamiliar plants, unique tools, distant mountains, and weather patterns that shaped daily life. Their languages became reflections of their world, forming a deep connection between speech and landscape. In the lush regions of the East, where rivers twisted like silver threads and forests grew dense, languages developed with soft consonants and layered syllables. The people there needed words to describe the gentle sway of branches, the shifting patterns of rainfall, the scent of blossoms and wet earth. Their languages grew melodic, flowing like the rivers they followed. Farther west, where the sun warmed vast plains and herds of animals roamed in sweeping arcs across the earth, speech became rhythmic and steady. Words emerged to describe movement, migration, hunting, and the rising and setting of the sun across open skies. Their languages felt grounded, shaped by the expansive land beneath their feet. In mountainous regions, voices naturally adapted to carry across rocky slopes and deep valleys. Speakers developed stronger tones, sharper consonant clusters, and a rise and fall rhythm that echoed the shape of the terrain. Their languages became sturdy and energetic, reflecting the resilience needed to survive in harsher climates. In coastal lands, where waves whispered day and night, languages took on a soothing cadence. Words carried hints of salt and wind, shaped by stories of tides, journeys, and distant horizons. Communities living near the sea often became skilled travelers, and their languages grew flexible, absorbing sounds from neighboring groups and evolving with every journey. Even in the still corners of the desert, where silence stretched across dunes like an eternal blanket, speech developed in ways influenced by the slow pace of life. Words lengthened, sounds softened, and metaphors arose from the stars and sand that surrounded them. These languages carried wisdom forged in solitude, shaped by long nights beneath vast celestial skies. In every region, languages evolved to express what mattered most to the people who spoke them. Their speech became a reflection of daily life, of survival, tradition, celebration, and hope. Over time, the languages began to diverge dramatically, branching away from one another like the limbs of a great tree. Some grew complex with elaborate grammar and structure. Others remained simple and direct. Some developed tones, where the rise and fall of pitch shaped meaning. Others relied on intricate consonant patterns or flowing vowel sounds. The world of language was becoming rich, diverse, and endlessly intricate. Though the people did not realize it, their evolving words were forming what future scholars would call language families, groups of tongues linked by shared origins. The descendants of those who settled nearer to the cradle of the earliest river civilizations spoke languages that would one day belong to Afro-Asiatic families, with roots stretching deep into the soil of the Middle East and North Africa. Their words carried patterns that echoed ancient rhythms, remnants of the speech once shared in Shinar. The groups who traveled farther north and west spoke early forms of what would become the Indo-European languages. These languages would eventually spread across vast continents, taking root in many lands, shaping the speech of future cultures. Within these families, linguistic patterns evolved slowly over centuries. A word might shift slightly in pronunciation each generation until it became unrecognizable to its distant cousins, yet still carried a faint echo of its origin. Meanwhile, the people who journeyed into distant eastern lands developed what modern scholars would call Sino-Tibetan and other Asian language families. Their languages formed intricate tonal systems, woven with delicate rises and falls of pitch that gave each word layers of meaning. These early tongues grew alongside rice fields, mountain valleys, and ancient rivers, becoming foundational to civilizations that would one day flourish with poetry, philosophy, and art. Farther still, the descendants of those who traveled to remote islands, northern forests, savannas, and jungles developed countless other language families, each shaped by climate, culture, and the passage of time. Some languages became incredibly complex, full of nuanced expressions and layered meanings. Others remained beautifully minimalist, expressing deep thoughts with short, simple sounds. Long before writing systems existed, these languages lived only in memory, passed from parents to children, whispered in stories, sung in lullabies, spoken in rituals and daily life. Every family, every community, became a guardian of its language, shaping it with each generation. Over time, these languages held the essence of identity. They carried each group's stories, wisdom, humor, and worldview. To speak a language was to belong to a people. To hear it was to feel connected to a shared past. No one in these early civilizations knew that their languages had sprung from a single ancient root. They did not realize that the voices echoing across distant mountains or flowing through distant forests were branches of the same ancient tree. But something within them, something quiet, ancestral, still remembered. It lived in the way they told stories, in the way they sang songs, in the way parents comforted children, in the fundamental desire to express, to connect, to belong. Language, in all its evolving beauty, became the thread that wove humanity's story together, even as the people themselves walked separate paths. As time flowed gently onward, cultures grew more distinct, shaped by their landscapes and their speech. As centuries passed and civilizations began to rise from the scattering of peoples, the world slowly filled with stories about the tower that had once stood on the plain of Shinar. But stories alone could not satisfy the curiosity of later generations. When archaeologists, scholars, and dreamers of ancient times looked back into history, they longed to find physical traces, something solid, something touched by human hands, that could whisper details about the world before languages diverged. They searched for ruins, foundations, inscriptions, and fragments that might reveal what truly happened in that distant age. The earth, however, is quiet with its secrets. It offers clues only in the softest ways, revealing traces gently, as though afraid to disturb the ancient silence. In the heart of Mesopotamia, where some of humanity's earliest cities later rose, explorers uncovered structures that resembled step terraces, huge platforms made of sun-dried bricks layered one on top of another. To the dreamer's eye, these structures felt like echoes of the tower described in old traditions. Though thousands of years separated them from the people of Shinar, these ruins suggested an architectural lineage, a memory passed down from generation to generation. The ziggurats of ancient cities like Uar and Babylon bore a striking resemblance to the kind of tower described in the stories, broad at the base, rising gently in levels, reaching for the sky with patient determination. Yet even as these structures spoke of early ambition, none could be linked with absolute certainty to the tower itself. The ancient world had been shaped and reshaped countless times by floods, wars, shifting rivers, and the slow erosion of wind and sand. Stone was rare in Mesopotamia, and clay bricks, though durable for centuries, eventually returned to the earth. Entire civilizations rose and fell, their buildings blending back into the soil from which they had been formed. In such a landscape, the traces of a structure built in humanity's earliest age would be delicate, soft fingerprints rather than clear signatures. Still, some ruins carried whispers. Near the site of ancient Babylon, archaeologists found foundations of large stepped structures that may once have towered above the city. One, known in later centuries as Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth, captured the imagination of scholars for generations. Though built long after the time of Shinar, its shape echoed the dreams of its ancestors: broad terraces, high platforms, a slow ascent toward the sky. To some, it felt like a memory of Babel preserved in brick and bitumen. Yet the earth gave no definitive answers. It allowed people to wonder, to speculate, to dream, but it withheld certainty. The ruins were clues, not conclusions. They were reminders of humanity's ancient longing to reach upward, but not evidence of the very tower whispered about in the earliest stories. Other archaeological finds contributed pieces to the larger puzzle. Inscriptions on clay tablets spoke of kings who built magnificent temples. Wall carvings depicted stepped structures rising from bustling cities. Tools used in brickmaking lay buried in layers of ancient soil. Each artifact felt like a gentle nod toward the tower, toward the idea of a unified people with the ambition to build something unforgettable. But archaeology also showed something else. Human creativity had expressed itself differently in every region after the scattering. The tower was not a singular dream, it was a theme, a pattern, a symbol repeated throughout early civilizations. The Egyptians built pyramids rising from the desert sands. The people of the Indus Valley built raised cities with complex layouts. Civilizations in the Americas later built their own stepped pyramids that reached toward the heavens in ways strikingly similar to the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Was this similarity a coincidence? A shared memory? A reflection of human instinct? Archaeology did not answer, nor did it try to. It simply laid the pieces gently before humanity, inviting reflection rather than certainty. Over time, scholars realized that searching for the real Tower of Babel was not about finding one single ruin buried beneath the earth. It was about understanding the world that shaped the story, a world where mud brick was the primary building material, where bitumen was used as mortar, where early cities experimented with monumental architecture, and where the human imagination began to stretch upward in new and daring ways. Some archaeologists pointed to ancient kiln sites, where thousands of clay bricks had once been fired. Others examined the remnants of canals and irrigation systems that sustained early cities. These traces painted a picture not just of ambition, but of organization, cooperation, and shared purpose. The people of early Mesopotamia understood how to work together on large projects. They had the tools, the skills, and the determination required to build something vast. Yet none of these findings spoke clearly of a single, towering project undertaken by a unified humanity before languages fragmented. Instead, the evidence suggested a slow evolution of architectural skill, one that spread across generations and civilizations. It implied that the Tower of the story might have been less about one physical structure and more about the symbolic embodiment of humanity's early attempts to build together on a grand scale. Archaeology also revealed that many ancient cities were built upon older ones. New layers rose atop the ruined foundations of previous generations, like pages added to a book. If the people of Shinar had built something remarkable in the days before their scattering, it may have been buried beneath countless layers of time. New civilizations might have unknowingly built over its remains, repurposing its bricks, reshaping its foundations, unknowingly folding its story into their own. As scholars brushed dust from ancient artifacts, as they read faded inscriptions illuminated by flickering lamplight, they came to understand that the mystery of the tower was not meant to be solved like a puzzle. It was meant to be reflected upon, wondered about, revisited in the imagination. Its meaning was larger than its physical form. The absence of clear archaeological proof allowed the story to breathe, to linger, to connect the modern world to the ancient one with gentle threads of curiosity. And through this silence, archaeology taught something subtle and beautiful. The story of the tower lives not in ruins, but in the long arc of human history. It lives in the rise of ancient cities, the evolution of languages, the birth of architecture, and the shared memories carried across continents. Every brick unearthed, every inscription translated, every ruin mapped is a small echo of an age when humanity dreamed together. The earth holds its memories quietly. It reveals only what time deems ready. And perhaps the greatest truth archaeology offers is that the tower's legacy is not buried in a single place, but spread throughout every early civilization shaped by hands that once worked together on the plain of Shinar. The monk had now entered the final stages of his preparation for what would become the most extraordinary insight of his life, the foresight of his own death. By this point, decades of observation, meditation, and ethical engagement had coalesced into a profound clarity of understanding. Every action, every thought, every subtle rhythm of nature and human behavior contributed to a tapestry of insight that allowed him to perceive patterns far beyond ordinary perception. To the casual observer, he seemed serene, even ordinary in appearance, yet within him lay a remarkable comprehension of the unseen currents guiding life and death. He moved with a calm deliberateness, his every action aligned with the rhythms of the world around him, yet his mind was attuned to layers of subtlety that most could never grasp. His awareness of mortality had reached an unparalleled depth. He observed the cycles of birth, growth, decay, and death not as distant abstractions, but as immediate truths reflected in both the natural world and human behavior. Flowers would bloom and wither, rivers would rise and fall, and the lives of villagers and monks alike followed subtle patterns of vulnerability and resilience. Through careful observation, he began to sense the particularities of his own life's arc, discerning the subtle signs and rhythms that indicated the approach of inevitable change. Yet he approached this awareness with a profound serenity, recognizing that death, like life, is a natural rhythm to be observed with calm understanding rather than fear or resistance. The monk's dreams had now reached a level of specificity that went beyond metaphor. In the quiet hours of the night, he would experience visions that revealed not only the events surrounding others but also glimpses of his own future. These dreams were neither frightening nor coercive. Rather, they were precise and informative, presenting sequences of events with a clarity that required discernment and reflection. By integrating these visions with his waking observations of human behavior, natural patterns, and cosmic cycles, he constructed an understanding of his own mortality that was deeply grounded, ethically informed, and remarkably accurate. Interactions with those around him continued to refine his understanding. Fellow monks, villagers, and travelers provided both context and contrast, revealing how subtle actions and decisions could produce consequences far beyond immediate perception. Through careful attention to their behaviors, words, and even unspoken cues, he deepened his insight into human nature and the delicate interplay of choice and consequence. This allowed him not only to anticipate the unfolding of events within the monastery and community but also to recognize the particular trajectory of his own life within this broader pattern. His foresight was now a harmonious integration of observation, reflection, and ethical judgment. Meditation played an increasingly critical role during this period. Extended periods of quiet contemplation allowed him to perceive the interplay between inner states and external events with exceptional clarity. He observed how thoughts, intentions, and emotions generated subtle vibrations that influenced both personal and communal outcomes. By maintaining a calm and attentive mind, he could trace the unfolding of events as if following invisible threads connecting cause and effect. These threads, when observed with ethical discernment and clarity, revealed the likely course of his own life, including the timing and circumstances surrounding his eventual death. The natural world offered continuous insight. The rhythms of the seasons, the movement of celestial bodies, and the behavior of plants and animals reflected patterns that mirrored human life and mortality. By attuning himself to these rhythms, the monk enhanced his perception of timing and alignment, learning to synchronize his actions, reflections, and predictions with the natural order. The cycles of sunrise and sunset, of tides and winds, and the subtle shifts in animal behavior all provided clues, reinforcing the coherence and reliability of his foresight. This connection with nature was both a tool for insight and a source of profound serenity, reminding him that life and death are parts of a continuous, harmonious flow. The monk's ethical commitment remained unwavering. With the profound insight he now possessed, he understood that the knowledge of his own mortality carried immense responsibility. He could neither allow fear nor pride to dictate his actions. Every thought, every word, and every interaction was filtered through the lens of compassion, restraint, and alignment with the greater good. He refrained from revealing the details of his visions prematurely, recognizing that foresight without wisdom and ethical grounding can become destructive rather than beneficial. His humility and ethical discipline ensured that his growing understanding of death served to guide, teach, and calm rather than dominate or frighten those around him. His awareness of timing became increasingly refined. He noticed that certain moments were aligned with broader currents, moments when action, speech, or silence could either harmonize with or disrupt the natural flow. Through careful observation, he discerned the precise moments when insight could be most accurately applied or when reflection alone was the proper path. This attention to timing extended not only to his interactions with others but also to the unfolding of his own life. Every heartbeat, breath, and decision was considered within the context of both immediate and extended patterns, allowing him to align his life's trajectory with the rhythms of the world. The monk also cultivated a heightened sensitivity to the subtle interplay of human emotion and spiritual energy. He could perceive the internal states of those around him with remarkable precision, recognizing fear, hope, doubt, and resolve in their most nuanced forms. This ability allowed him to anticipate reactions, guide decisions, and maintain harmony within the monastery and community. It also allowed him to anticipate the emotional and spiritual needs of his own self in approaching mortality, preparing him to meet the inevitable with courage, clarity, and acceptance. By the culmination of this period, the monk had fully integrated observation, meditation, dream insight, ethical discernment, and awareness of natural and cosmic rhythms. He possessed a comprehensive understanding of both the world around him and the trajectory of his own life within it. The foresight of his death was no longer speculative. It was the culmination of decades of disciplined practice, reflective observation, and ethical cultivation. He could anticipate not only the timing but also the circumstances with remarkable precision, a profound testament to the harmony of mind, heart, and environment he had achieved. Through this integration, the monk had also achieved a profound serenity. He no longer feared death, nor did he seek to alter its course through force or anxiety. Instead, he embraced it as the natural continuation of the rhythms he had spent his life observing. Long after the voices on the plain of Shinar drifted apart into different directions, the story of the tower lingered in the quiet spaces of human memory. It stayed not as a structure of bricks and bitumen, but as a soft echo of meaning woven into the hearts of those who remembered what it felt like to be one. As generations passed, people began to reflect more deeply, not on the height of the tower or the confusion of tongues, but on the quiet lessons hidden within the story. These lessons moved like warm currents beneath the surface of history, reminding humanity of truths both simple and profound. Among these truths, the theme of unity remained the most tender. People remembered a time when every voice flowed together in harmony, when one language connected every family and every heart. Even after the world grew filled with countless tongues, the memory of that unity held a certain sweetness. It reminded people that cooperation, understanding, and shared purpose were natural to the earliest generations. In their bedtime stories and gentle teachings, parents described the beauty of that early harmony, not as a longing to return to it, but as a reminder of what human beings are capable of when they listen to one another. Unity in the story of the tower was not the problem. It was the gift that allowed humanity to build together, dream together, rise together. It was the foundation for creativity and progress. But unity, when left without guidance, could become something fragile. Without humility, it could drift quietly into ambition too large to fully contain. And this gentle tension, between unity and the human desire to reach upward, became another theme carried softly through the ages. The people who reflected on the story understood that ambition was not wrong. The desire to build, to create, to aspire towards something greater had always pulsed within the human heart. It was the spark that allowed civilizations to grow. But ambition, like fire, needed balance to shine without consuming. In the story of the tower, people remembered how ambition drifted slowly from inspiration to identity, how the desire to make a name became the quiet center of their efforts. It was not arrogance in a loud or harsh form, but a subtle shift of focus, from the shared good to the glory of achievement. This lesson, whispered through time, encouraged future generations to carry ambition gently, like a lantern that guides the way rather than burns the path. For many listeners, the story offered a peaceful reminder that human beings thrive not when they reach alone, but when they reach together, with humility, patience, and understanding. The tower was a symbol of what people could achieve when they united. But the scattering that followed showed that diversity too was a gift, leading humanity into new lands, new ways of living, new languages, and countless new stories. Then there was the theme of memory, soft, lingering, and deeply human. Even long after the confusion of tongues, people carried the tale forward in many forms. They told it in whispers beside fires, grew quiet when elders spoke of the early days, and pondered its meaning beneath starlit skies. Memory, in the tale of the tower, served as a bridge between the past and the present. It reminded people of where they came from, even as they walked new paths across the earth. The story became a way of honoring early humanity's unity, resilience, and creativity. Memory also offered comfort. The world could feel vast and divided, languages many, distances wide. But the story gently reassured listeners that beneath all those differences, there once existed a single family, a shared voice, a moment when humanity stood together. That memory softened the loneliness of a fractured world. It allowed people to imagine a deeper connection running quietly beneath their diversity. Some understood the story as a reflection of the delicate balance between human freedom and divine wisdom. The scattering of languages was not seen as punishment, but as a redirection, an invitation for humanity to discover new lands, explore new possibilities, and grow in ways unity alone could not have offered. Through this lens, the story was not a tragedy, but a soft transition from one stage of humanity to another. A gentle shift that guided people outward, like seeds carried on a breeze. Others viewed the tower as a symbol of humanity's longing to reach the heavens, not in rebellion, but in search of meaning. To build upward was to express a desire to connect with something greater, something divine. But the story reminded them that connection does not come from height or architecture, but from humility, wonder, and stillness. The heavens, after all, were always present. Above them, around them, within each breath of wind. No tower was needed to touch the divine, only an open heart. Still others focused on the lesson of limitations, not as restrictions, but as gentle boundaries meant to protect. The scattering of languages ensured that no single group could dominate the earth unchecked. Diversity created balance. Individual cultures could grow in their own time, their own ways, shaped by their own needs and surroundings. In this way, the story carried a quiet wisdom. Humanity thrives not because everyone is the same, but because each culture holds its own light. As centuries passed, philosophers, storytellers, and dreamers continued to reflect on the tale. They pondered why humanity had reached for the heavens in the first place. Was it longing? Curiosity? Fear? Or perhaps it was simply the natural desire of the human spirit to rise, to grow towards something undefinable and beautiful. The tower, unfinished yet unforgettable, became a symbol of that desire. Its legacy lived on in temples, pyramids, mountain sanctuaries, and sacred sites built by countless cultures. Each one carried a piece of the same ancient impulse, to bridge earth and sky, to seek meaning beyond the visible world, to express humanity's deepest dreams in stone, brick, or memory. And so the tower's moral themes lingered softly in the world, not as rules, but as gentle reminders. Unity is powerful when guided with humility. Ambition is beautiful when shaped by wisdom. Memory connects us to the roots we cannot see. Diversity is not a fracture, but a gift. And the desire to rise is natural, as long as the heart remains grounded. Through these quiet reflections, the story of the tower remained a peaceful companion to human history, whispering wisdom, inspiring contemplation, and reminding each generation that even in a world filled with many languages, humanity shares a single beginning and perhaps a single hope. Art, imagination, and storytelling carried the Tower of Babel far beyond the plains of Shinar. Long after its bricks had crumbled into dust, artists and storytellers across centuries breathed new life into the legend, shaping it to reflect their own worlds. In each age, the tower appeared differently, sometimes grand and spiraling, sometimes fragile and humble, always reaching upward like a memory that refused to fade. Early artists in Mesopotamia imagined the tower as a ziggurat, stepping gently toward the sky. Medieval painters transformed it into structures resembling their own castles and arches, blending ancient myth with familiar architecture. During the Renaissance, painters like Bruegel depicted the tower with astonishing detail, its ramping curves, busy workers, and misty summit creating a vision of ambition mixed with wonder. Writers, too, found endless inspiration in the story. Some wrote poems about the sudden scattering of languages. Others reflected on humanity's longing to reach the heavens, interpreting the tower as a symbol of aspiration rather than pride. In children's tales, the story softened even further, highlighting the beauty of diversity and the meaning behind different languages. Music and theater embraced the legend as well. Choirs performed melodies in multiple languages to represent the moment of confusion. Playwrights explored the emotional weight of separation. Modern digital artists reimagined the tower through futuristic or dreamlike imagery. Every interpretation, simple sketch or grand painting, held the same heart, the tower as a symbol of human unity, ambition, and the mystery of language. Through art, the Tower of Babel never vanished. It rose again and again, not as stone, but as imagination made visible. Centuries after ancient memories faded, scholars began searching not for the tower itself, but for something even more mysterious, the first human language. If all people once stood together on the plains of Shinar, could their voices have sprung from a single ancestral tongue? This gentle question guided linguists, anthropologists, and dreamers into a deep exploration of humanity's oldest past. Researchers compared words from distant lands, European, African, Asian, and Pacific languages, looking for tiny echoes that survived across ages. They found patterns linking entire families of speech: Indo-European, Afro-Asiatic, Sino-Tibetan, and many more. These families pointed backward to earlier proto-languages, ancient tongues reconstructed through similarities in sound and meaning. Then came the mystery of mysteries. Was there a proto-world language? A single, ancient speech that humanity once shared before scattering? Scholars cannot prove it, yet hints whisper through the similarities found in basic sounds, simple syllables passed from parent to child across thousands of years. The idea remains a gentle possibility, not a certainty. Archaeologists added to the search by tracing early human migrations. DNA evidence showed that humanity once moved outward from a single region. If people once journeyed together, it becomes easier to imagine that they once spoke together too. Modern linguistics cannot uncover the exact words spoken in humanity's earliest days. But it reveals something quietly beautiful. All languages, no matter how different, belong to the same human story. They connect us to ancestors who once stood together, describing the world for the first time. The search for the first language does not end in answers. It ends in wonder at how deeply connected humanity truly is. As the story draws to its final moments, the ancient world grows faint once more, like a distant landscape fading beneath the setting sun. The plain of Shinar grows quiet, the half-finished tower resting peacefully in the glow of memory. Its bricks no longer rise toward the heavens, yet its meaning lingers softly, carried not in stone, but in the hearts of those who remember what the tower once symbolized. The people who walked away from that plain left footprints that led to forests, mountains, deserts, and oceans. Their voices reshaped themselves into new languages. Their cultures grew unique, vibrant, and beautiful. And though their paths diverged, the memory of unity remained tucked gently behind their diversity. As you drift back from the ancient world, picture the tower one last time, standing silent beneath a sky full of stars. Its shadow stretches across the plain, not as a monument of pride, but as a reminder of humanity's shared beginning. Nothing about the story feels harsh now. It settles instead as a peaceful reflection on connection, creativity, and the delicate balance between reaching upward and remaining grounded. The night deepens around the tower. The warm breeze falls still. The voices of Shinar fade into quiet, leaving only calmness and the soft hum of time passing. And with that, the journey returns you gently to the present moment, your breath easy, your mind calm, the story resting like a soft blanket around you. The ancient world sleeps. The tower rests. And the story ends in peace.